Good afternoon, Terps. My name is Jeff Williams, the Director of Alumni Engagement at the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. Today's webinar is part of the Smith School Office of Alumni Relations Professional Development Webinar Series. Through these sessions, we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. Topics include influence at work, the science of getting what you want. Is a startup part of your second act? And today's topic, burn the whiteboards, stop brainstorming and go ask customers these 5 questions. During the webinar, we encourage you to use the chat box to share any questions or comments you might have for the presenter. Please feel free to submit the questions throughout the session, and the presenter will answer them as often as possible. And who is our presenter? I am pleased to introduce Bob London. Bob is a 20-plus year marketing veteran who has helped companies of all sizes achieve rapid results through more effective marketing. He pioneered the outsourced chief marketing officer concept in 2003 when he founded London Inc., a B2B marketing consultancy. He worked with, advised, and mentored dozens of small and mid-sized companies on their marketing strategy and execution, serving as an interim or part-time CMO. Today, Bob is the founder and CEO of Chief Listening Officers, where he helps companies develop marketing strategies that start with learning the customer's true perspective. As a speaker, Bob has served as a keynote at numerous events, including the Mid-Atlantic Marketing Summit, Potomac Tech Wire's Future of Marketing Conference, and the nationwide Unintentional Entrepreneur Series, among other engagements. As a writer, Bob also publishes the popular Drive Time Marketing video blog, as well as Bobservations, a blog series that chronicles the often humorous intersections of business and life. His work and writing have been featured by the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Miami Herald, USA Today, the Washington Business Journal, and Smart CEO DC Magazine. Bob is one of our very accomplished Smith Terps, and we are very pleased to have him here today. He graduated from the University of Maryland, College Park, with a bachelor's degree in marketing. I'll now throw things over to you, Bob.
Just going to dive right in. I want to take you back to 2012 when there was a lot of noise going on in the market. And I'm assuming most of you were alive and well in 2012 and had wireless phones. So you may remember the battle of the maps. It's the blue map, the red map, and if you notice, there's a trick question, whose map is bigger? The maps are the same size, but does anyone actually remember which map provided 99.87% coverage versus 99.83%? I'm going to guess that the answer is no, and when I give this talk, no one really knows the difference. And that's shocking because there was $500 million being spent in advertising by both companies in total to promote this message. So it's a little strange that they thought it was important enough to promote their map and their percentage of coverage of how many states and Americans, et cetera. But we as consumers don't really remember much of the detail. And if you think about it, how could there be such a huge gap? How can 2 big accomplished companies focus on something that we don't understand the value of? It just didn't matter to us. And that's why we don't remember. It's not relevant to us. So in 2012, a gentleman named John Ledger was named the CEO of T-Mobile. And at the time, taking you back to 2012 again, if you don't know much about the wireless industry, that's fine. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about T-Mobile in this little fancy graphic right here. They were actually in 4th place in the U.S., even behind Sprint, who had its own problems, and then they were in a commodity business. And so John Ledger stepped up and said, I'm going to try and fix this. I'm going to take this job. So day 2, he called in his senior marketing and sales staff, and he said, what's going on? And he said, the answer was, you know what, our network is so terrible, we don't have a map we can show, like our color is fuchsia. I guess we'd have a fuchsia map versus red and blue, but we can't do that. So we can't compete on that, and our network sucks, and that's the problem. So Mr. Ledger thought about that, and he said, okay, tomorrow is a new day. I'm going to meet with my technical staff. And what do you think they said? They said, yeah, we have problems. All the companies have problems with their network, but it's our marketing that's terrible. Our marketing, those people couldn't market their way out of a wet paper bag, so it's their fault. So if you're in marketing, or you're an executive, or if you're in sales, or any kind of sort of customer-facing role, you have to, at this point, do what Mr. Ledger did. He decided to go listen for himself. He literally went to a T-Mobile call center, and for 6 nights in a row, he did nothing but listen to calls, real live customer support calls from T-Mobile customers, and presumably customers and potential customers. And I believe he actually sprayed a healthy dose of Purell onto the headset before he put it on. He was a little worried about that. But what do we think he heard? Do we think he heard T-Mobile customers complaining about T-Mobile's network map, or the fact that they didn't have one on TV? Do you think it was that? Do you think that it was about other technology issues, or do you think it was something else? So according to an interview Mr. Ledger gave to Fast Company magazine, which I encourage everyone to Google, he found out that none of the technology mattered. In fact, there was what he termed a plethora of hatred for our entire industry. So there's a list of things that customers wanted to change. And so right there, there's a win. There's a little victory for a guy who's been on the job 4 days, where he says, well, if he's thinking, if people hate the industry that much, maybe we can find out what they hate and fix it. Okay. What was at the top of the list of things that people wanted to change? Now, again, assuming you were a wireless customer in 2012, you may have your own recollections of what was really annoying. What was really annoying about being a wireless customer back then? And if it wasn't technology, what could it have been? And it turned out that the most prevalent issue he heard about was contracts. What does that mean? People were being basically held hostage by expensive cancellation fees on multiple-year contracts as wireless customers. And that's something in the marketing industry, the nickname for that is hostage marketing. In other words, you're stuck somewhere and you're paying and you're not thrilled with it, but there's not much you can do about it because it's too expensive to leave. So he said, why don't we just do away with contracts? And I don't want to offend anybody who in the listening audience here who works for a very large corporation, but when he said let's do away with contracts, a lot of the people, the corporate weenies at T-Mobile, said you can't do that. And he said, why can't we do that? And they said, because that's how it's done. Everyone does it that way. So let that be a lesson to all of us, that if we start thinking and hearing from other people, everyone does it that way. The lesson is, well, maybe that means there's an opportunity to do it differently. So because Mr. Ledger was the head of the company, he got to say, why can't we do that? Why don't we just do that and fix it? I mean, really, what did they have to lose? Now, before I go on to talk about how he took these insights and turned them into a strategy with his team, I want to point out that this thing that I've nicknamed the elevator rant. What is the elevator rant? When companies are focused on their elevator pitch and they're saying, we are this, we do that, the benefits are this, what they're really doing is talking from their perspective. The elevator rant means that you understand the customer's perspective first, and then you work that into your marketing so that you're showing people, hey, I understand what really is upsetting you about our product or our industry, and we're fixing it. So that's what an elevator rant is. So back to John Ledger, who, as you can tell maybe from the way I'm talking, he's kind of one of my heroes in the business world. So he said, why can't we do this? Let's just do it. So this is what follows is really a lesson in substantive marketing, kind of marketing with a capital M, the strategic part, and also branding. So they launched a campaign where T-Mobile was nicknamed, they nicknamed themselves the UnCarrier. The UnCarrier meant they were going to stand for everything that the industry currently didn't stand for. So for example, no more 2-year service contracts, which is what the first line of copy says. No more data overages. And then at the bottom it says, stuck in a contract, we'll cover that up to $650 per line. And of course, as you can imagine, the three other companies who, quote unquote, everyone does it the way they do it, were outraged. How can you do that? How can you do away with contracts? I thought we had an unwritten silent agreement that we were all going to have contracts. And then other people in the financial industry said, well, how can you give away $650 per line? How are you going to grow and turn a profit? And as I'll show you in a moment, it all worked out really well for T-Mobile, and they were quite profitable. And I want to point out a couple things about branding. Now, if you notice this young lady on the right side of the screen, that is a picture that is meant to capture the essence of someone who is perhaps an angry consumer. Again, I keep coming back to the term plethora of hatred, which is what people felt about the industry. And she's literally kicking out or attacking, to kind of break out, break the rules to break you free. The other joke I usually tell at this point is that she's also subtly, this is an image of someone kicking Sprint's ass, excuse my language, because that's exactly what happened. T-Mobile, in about a year's time, leaped past Sprint and became the #3 carrier behind AT&T and Verizon. And I want to also highlight on the lower left, there's a couple words here, the call to action. It doesn't say click here, which would be a nice, gentle, typical marketing call to action, or learn more. It says break free. So the brand and the imagery supports the specifics of the value proposition: no more contracts, no more limits on data overages. So you could have the imagery, but if you didn't have the substantive value proposition that reflects the customer's elevator rant, the imagery would be very weak. When it's the other way around, if you start with a great value proposition and you realize, hey, we can really drive that home with some great imagery and language, that's really the essence of branding. And so just to use the expression, the rest is history. I mean, so this is a 4-year chart starting in 2012. You can see the dip right when 2012, the dip in the stock price. This is a share price compared to major indices. And this turned out to be, a very smart move by T-Mobile. And they actually, as recently as that last year, they continue to introduce features and benefits that line up with new elevator rants. So one example in 2016 was, we know that people don't like the fact that they lose their data minutes if they don't use them in a month. So we're going to have data rollover. Now, that's not a brand new concept. That's been used in voice for a long time. But again, T-Mobile was the first of the 4 major carriers to say, we hear you and we're going to do something about it. There are lots of corporate sort of behavioral lessons here about what happens when you know there's a problem with your customers and you don't deal with it because you're doing fine and things are comfortable. This is what happens: is someone else will come along and do it, solve that problem, and kind of eat your lunch, so to speak. So this is not just a one-time problem with one big company, and I can vouch for that because I've worked with, as Jeff said, dozens of companies, small and medium, just like the companies we all probably work for. And McKenzie Consulting has done a study that has documented this, and they looked at the messaging that companies were using in their marketing, and they looked at what was important to customers, and they found a huge disconnect. They said companies are talking past their customers. So more specifically, the themes that many companies consider important appear to have minimal influence on the buyer's perceptions. And I'm as a marketer, and I've been in marketing for more than 20 years, it's painful for me to read that because it shows how far companies have to go still after all these years to prove that they understand customers and can reshape marketing strategy to reflect what's really important to customers. So the way I would drive that point home is to say that that's why so much marketing is forgettable and ineffective. I mean, a great marketing campaign might get a 1% response rate or a 1% click-through rate if it's successful. That means that we're leaving out 99% of the audience feels like it's not relevant. So why is so much marketing forgettable and ineffective? And what I've learned is that it's because we as companies go at the process from the wrong perspective, our own. So we start by saying, what do we do? How can we position it? And how great is it? And what words can we add? What adjectives can we add to say how great that is? And my answer to that is every company thinks it's special until they hit the marketplace. And then they find out that customers view everyone pretty much the same and they can't hear you through the noise. So that's a problem. And it would be very inappropriate of me for talk so much about a problem in such a passionate way without talking about a solution or two. So let's talk about a specific example that I've experienced with a company that happens to be based here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And if you know anything about information technology companies, this was a services company that provided managed outsourced information technology. So they will help small and medium businesses keep their internet running and keep the software patched and make sure everything is secure on the network. And that's what they do. And this company was very successful for its first 15 years, but then they stalled. And when I met them, this is how they talked about themselves. They said, what sets us apart is our commitment to service and our people. We partner with our customers. Now, there may have been a time in business where that meant something, but because it is so nebulous and because so many companies say almost the exact same thing, it really is quite meaningless and empty. And and I think the company that this IT vendor, they understood that. They didn't really know what to do about it. They thought the answer was to do more, to have more events, meet more people, hand out more business cards, send gifts and things like that. And that is not the answer to a sort of a more fundamental marketing problem. So I went through a process with them and it's a process I've now repeated about 20 times with different companies. The process was to go have some very high-level conversations with about 10 or 15 of their customers and some companies that they had wanted to do business with but that didn't select them. So customers but also lost deals. And what I found out was that the elevator rant, which again it's what people are really thinking that they probably haven't shared yet. The elevator rant actually, again, much as with T-Mobile, didn't have anything to do with technology. The people I talked to said, yeah, the technology's fine. I mean, if they weren't good at technology, we would never have hired them. And if they proved to be bad at technology, we would have let them go years ago. Everything's working. But what keeps me up at night, what I'm anxious about, is the next technology wave that I'm completely unaware of. So I'm going to give you kind of a persona of the type of person I talk to give you an idea of what the world looked like from their perspective. This would be typically a chief financial officer of, let's say, a mid-sized association, okay? This person has responsibility for finance and accounting because they're a CFO, obviously, but because it's a small organization, they have responsibility for HR. They also have responsibility for facilities, and they also have responsibility for IT, which they probably don't know anything about. So the way they described it, and the way I would describe it to you, when I asked them, well, what do you mean missing the next technology wave? And this association CFO would say, well, let's just say that 2 years ago, I'm looking in the Wall Street Journal and I see the terminology cloud computing, and it's on page D21 of the Wall Street. So that's the fourth section. In the back of the fourth section, 2 years ago, they're talking about cloud, maybe 3 years ago. And I said, okay. And then the CFO said, and then fast forward 6 months, and then it's on page B12 of the Wall Street Journal, which implies that it's getting a little bit more into the mainstream of business news. And then fast forward another 6 months, and it's on page A1 of the Wall Street Journal, and there's a huge article about how the cloud is changing everything, and there are examples of hundreds of businesses that are moving to the cloud in order to be more agile and save money on their computing. And guess what, the CFO says? On that day, my boss, who also gets the Wall Street Journal, comes in with the A1, page A1 article and says, wow, this is really powerful. What are we doing in the cloud? To which the CFO says, I don't know. So that's what they meant by missing the next technology wave. Now that happens to be, again, it's that the reason it's important to ask people what they mean is because you can get an idea of the emotion behind it for them. It's not that they're going to get fired. I really don't think that was ever a risk for any of the people that I talked to. But it does keep them up at night because they want to be professional about their job. They want to be educated, and there's a negative business impact of not being on top of technology, because then you don't know, especially as a CFO, what's the next investment we should make? Should we upgrade to Windows 10? Should we embrace the cloud? Should we look at virtualized servers? Should we look, what about all these employees that are bringing mobile into the workplace? What are companies doing about that? That was a very consistent thread throughout almost every conversation that I had with my clients, customers, and prospects. So this is an example now. What I'm about to show you is how we re-architected the value proposition to incorporate the elevator ramp. And this set off a wave of growth for this particular company that was quite impressive, and I'll describe that in a moment. So the new pitch was, I'll tell you what, we understand that people like you who are not technologists, but you're in charge of technology, you're concerned about missing the next big thing in technology. You just need to be more educated, and you feel like you're kind of, to use one of the reality shows, you're kind of naked and afraid, you know, you're flying blind. So the new pitch started that way and then said, so tell you what if every year we come out and visit your office and we'll brief you on the top 3 technology trends, the big 3 that we've established, and how they impact businesses or organizations like yours. How does that sound? Wow, that would solve my problem. Because in addition to you guys keeping, this is now in the CFO voice, in addition to you guys doing a good job with the technology, now you're going to help protect me or insulate me from being blindsided by this next big trend. When I started saying this new pitch in some of the conversations I was having, because one of the great things about having human conversations is you can hear something and you can create a concept right there and say, well, what if we did this? So as I started asking, hey, what if we did this? One of the customers said, if you did that, I would be a customer for life. I would be a customer for life. And I think, so what I would say is I usually ask people to raise their hands if you don't want a customer for life, and no one raises their hand, because we would all like the right kind of customers for as long as we can keep them. It's good for business, and it gives us a lot of stability. So we all would like to have customers for life, wouldn't we? So that's an example of a very typical company that was essentially, a commodity. This was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I want to tell you where they were as a business and where they are now, briefly. So I'm happy to say that in 2016, and this was not all because of the work we did together that I just described, this company joined the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing private U.S. companies. Now, the reason that's more impressive than it may seem, although I think it's impressive in and of itself, is that 5 years ago, when I had my first meeting with this same company, at the conclusion of that meeting, the CEO said, Bob, do you think after this discussion, do you think the patient can be saved? So my first reaction was, well, my mother always wanted me to be a doctor, so I guess I'm kind of the marketing doctor. They're asking me if this company can be saved. But the reality was that's how concerned they were about their trajectory as a business. And now when I speak to them, they say, wow, you really helped us learn the value of talking to customers, because what they're concerned about was not what we thought. And that's the lesson here today. Your customers, I can almost guarantee that they're thinking about things and sharing them perhaps with others on the figuratively on the elevator ramp when you're not around. And the ability to get in there and ask the right questions at the right time to uncover those rants or those insights is the key to growth. And I've seen it happen over and over and over again. And I believe that, again, after a couple decades in marketing and having a lot of battle scars of things that didn't work, as well as some that were reasonably successful, I'm seeing so much consistent positive result from the fact that if you start by getting a good read on, by going out and having conversations with people in your target audience, including customers, you will get insights that you can use to translate into more effective and relevant marketing. So now, how do we do that? How do we do that? If you want to hear what your customers are really thinking, and I'm assuming that in today's business environment, customers have a lot of power, more than they used to. We all need to know what our customers are really thinking. But some of you may be having a little thought bubble over your head that says, I don't really want to know what my customers think. I'm okay where we are. We don't need, oh, that's fine. I get that. I totally understand that. If you want to hear what your customers are really thinking, I'm about to describe to you a very methodical, scientific, proven process based on very sophisticated principles that I've used multiple times. And that process is called just ask and listen. And I want to just reinforce that that's kind of one of the running jokes I have, is that there's no big data involved here. There's no big analytics. There's no dashboards and corporate dashboards and ERP systems where the answer resides. T-Mobile had all of that software and dashboards, but it wasn't working for them. The insights were reading in between the lines and going out and actually having human conversations with people. And it's just something companies don't do enough. So just ask and listen. So I'm going to give you 5 questions, 5 of the 12. Generally, there's a list of 12 questions I use kind of as it's not an interview, it's more of a discussion that I have with companies. Okay, before I give you the 5 questions, I'm just going to describe the process and the attitude. How do you do this? So it's really simple. It's a series of maybe 10 or 15 20-minute phone calls. And it's a mix of, as I mentioned before, customers who know you pretty well and prospects. Now, the prospects could be people that you have, they haven't decided whether they're going to buy from you or not. And in some cases, though, maybe they've decided that they're going to choose someone else. And as painful as it may be to talk to companies that chose someone else, that's sometimes where a lot of the great insights are. And I want to emphasize that there are 2 reasons that these are phone calls and not face-to-face visits, because some people say, well, I need to see their body language. No, you don't. Here's why. Here's what happens on phone calls. You're talking to a decision maker of some sort. So again, I've done this many, 700 calls with my clients, customers, and prospects. They are alone. They're alone with their thoughts. They're not staring across the table at me. We didn't have to set up time. They didn't have to worry about the receptionist greeting me and did I get caught. They don't have to think about anything. They can close their door and think about the answers to the questions that I have for them. And I found, and I have done them face-to-face as well, and I found that the calls are much more effective in terms of getting insights, number 1. Number 2, it's just easier for everybody. If I tell you you have to have 20 or 15 face-to-face meetings to do this process, that's a lot more work than just saying you have to have 15 20-minute calls. And when it says 20 minutes, you ask for 20 minutes, and what I found is the average call probably lasts more like 30 or 35 minutes because it's a conversation. This is not a questionnaire that you're asking them. It's not a checklist or a survey. So a lot of times the people are more loquacious. They start talking and they really want to share insights. So this gets into the how you listen, how you act during this call and how you listen. Again, it's not a stiff, formal process. It's much more of a conversation. And if you've done any studying on conversations or listening, there are 3 levels of conversation. Level 1 is me talking all about me. Level 2 is you sharing about yourself. Level 3 is we're having a dialogue. And we're going back and forth and building sometimes, reacting to and building on what each other's comments are. That's where you want to get, ideally. You're seeking their insight. It's not a test or quiz for them. When people are asked for their insights or opinions or ideas, they do tend to open up. It's not necessarily because they have big egos and they think they're right. It's because they actually want to help. They know that you are a company that is trying to grow and achieve goals. And they're happy to do what they can to help. Not all of them, but I would say that of the 700 calls roughly, it probably took 750 email invitations to get 700 calls. So that tells you that only 50 out of 750 declined, or didn't respond. So most people want to help. When you're on the phone, you have to drop all of your ego and biases and resist any tendency to be defensive. What does that mean? Well, it means that they may say some things that are critical. They may give, hopefully they'll do it constructively. And you may have some thoughts going in about, well, I know what they're going to say, or I think I know what they're going to say. And we can't do that. The process won't work if you go into it with too many filters. And as far as being defensive, it can be a challenge when someone says, well, I think what most companies have a problem with in your industry is none of them do this. And you may be thinking, yeah, there's a reason, because it's really hard to do this. Don't say that. What you can do is at the end of the call, when you're thanking them, is to say, look, I want to let you know that I heard what you said about the industry, and I think that's a valid criticism, and I think it has been challenging for us to address that, but this kind of call helps us get the perspective that we need to go revisit it. And that's not fluff. Don't say it if you don't mean it, right? And then you have to follow up at some point. But if that goes back to the plethora of hatred for the wireless industry. If you have 10 calls and 8 people mention the same thing, the criticism of your industry, that's an opportunity for you. It's an opportunity for you to do something and solve a problem and differentiate and position yourself against your competitors. And then the last point here is no selling. So don't email them a proposal 5 minutes after you get off the phone with them. Oh, you mentioned you mentioned that you might be in the market for a micron collaborator, particle thing. I'm making that up. But we happen to have that, so I just sent you a quote for one. No, don't do that. What you can do is if they bring up something that a problem that you can solve, and maybe they didn't know you could solve it, at the very end you can just say, hey, I want to thank you again, and by the way, we did announce recently that we do have that solution, and if it's okay, I would love to send you some information or have someone follow up with you. Okay, or they can say no, that's fine. So that's the tone and the tenor and the approach for doing this very simple process of getting on the phone with, again, 10 to 15 customers and prospects. So let's talk about 5 questions. These are, again, 5, probably the top 5 of the 12 or so that I use as a guide for my conversation. Number 1, hey, Mr. Customer or Prospect, what are your top 2 or 3 priorities, like for the board? What do I mean by the board? So if you're talking to a decision maker who's with a public company or one that is backed by other financing like venture capital, they're going to have every quarter or twice a year, they're going to have a meeting where the board oversees the company and they say, okay, what are the updates on the top 2 or 3 things? If the person you're talking to is with a company that doesn't have a board of directors, that's fine. This question can be used, but it's also an analogy for, you could say to them, hey, what are the top 2 or 3 things on your whiteboard? Now I know, you know how I feel about whiteboards. I think that they should be burned so that people don't get distracted from what they should be doing, which is going and talking to customers. But the reality is people have whiteboards, and you can ask someone, what's on your whiteboard? And that is a metaphor for what are the top 2 or 3 things you have to get done this year with your team. Now, why don't we just say, what's your pain point? Or what keeps you up at night? Well, people have been asked those questions for probably 100 years in some form or another. And when people are asked questions that they've heard 50,000 times before, or even 50 times before, they give very routine answers without thinking. That's not the process we're going through here. We're trying to come at it from an angle that elicits real insights, because they have to think about the answer. So that's how these questions that I'm giving you came about. There was some trial and error, and perhaps I did in the beginning say, what keeps you up at night? But when someone is asked a question that's basically a cliche, they're going to give a cliche answer. And it wasn't until I started asking the questions this way that I could, you can tell on the phone that someone doesn't answer right away. They go, all right, hold on a second, let me think about that. And that's when you know you're getting good stuff. And why do we ask this question in the first place? Because the more you know about their priorities at the top, the things that they have to get done, the more opportunity you have to learn about how your product or service relates to their goals and those priorities. And of course, that's where their money is being spent, presumably. So it's important to understand that. Now, if you're in sales, salespeople have known, great salespeople have known for a long time. You have to know where the budget's being spent and figure out how you can get your product or service into that, to align with that budget. But if you're in marketing or if you're the CEO, if you ask this question of multiple companies, you're going to get insights into what the trend is out there in a particular part of your marketplace. And that will help you, think about the messaging on your website. If you can reflect, hey, we understand your priorities are X. You're trying to do X. Again, that's doing marketing from the customer's perspective, not yours. So generally what you're trying to establish is what value is your product or service adding to their business, or can it add? Next question. Hey, Mr. Customer or Ms. Prospect, does our industry have a reputation, good or bad? Now, there are two things here. First of all, you think, well, they're not going to tell me if we have an ugly baby. That's the expression. Do we have no, your baby's ugly. No, they're not going to tell me that. Well, they will. They won't say it that way. But if you ask, does our industry have a reputation, good or bad, what does that give you? The answers will give you an opportunity to understand if there are concerns or elevator rants about you and all your competitors together. Like when I think of the blank industry, I just get exasperated because they all do this when they should be doing that. Again, it gives you an opportunity to position yourself against that instead of just going with the flow and dealing with the reputation. But I mean, you think of it this way. Everybody has this imaginary thought bubble pop up over their head when they go, let's say they're walking past a trade show booth and they say, oh, that's one of those blank companies, right? Or if they get a cold call or they're in a sale, oh, where are you going, Bill? I'm going to meet with one of those XYZ companies. Oh, wow, that's going to be interesting. What is in that thought bubble? And you need to know that because when someone meets with you or reads your marketing material or gets a call, you have to diffuse that thought bubble first. That's why the better elevator pitches and messaging start with the elevator rant. Hey, we understand that you know all technology. I'll go back to the IT vendor. All IT vendors are the same. And we're all, we all do technology pretty well. So, and we say our service differentiates us, but that doesn't mean anything. But we understand that. And we also understand that what you might be concerned about is missing the next technology wave, et cetera. That's why we've done X. That's why we are delivering this new value-added briefing or whatever it is. Number 3. So now we're kind of going down a level. Let's be more specific. Name something annoying that vendors do. I realize this is starting to sound like Family Feud. Name something annoying vendors do. So here we want to drill down for specific complaints. Now this could be about your company. It could be about a specific behavior or flaw that, again, when an industry has been doing something the same way for a long time, they don't check to see if customers are okay with it, and customers just go along with it because it's too troubling to point out that there's a problem, A, or B, they don't think it's going to change, and quote unquote, everyone does it that way, so why bother? So this is what you want to go for here. In my experience, there's always at least one juicy or substantive industry complaint that you can at least take back with you after you've done these calls, and you can say, I wonder if there's an opportunity there. Like, how much would it take for us to fix this thing that they hate about our industry? Again, think about the contracts in T-Mobile, and I'll say that one of the ingredients for all of this is having the guts to act on what you hear, right? So if you're willing to ask the questions and get the insights, that's only as useful as your the courage you have to move forward and say, we're going to change that. Okay? Number 4, what do we do better than anyone else? So I'll relate a brief anecdote here that there's a gentleman who's actually also involved with the University of Maryland, who's a multiple-time entrepreneur and a big investor in the area, and he's a big organizer in the technology investment community. He was interviewing public relations firms for a company that he had started, and the PR firms, let's say 4 of them, all came in and they all had their list of things, their capabilities. So he would start and say, well, what do you guys do? They'd say, well, we not only do media relations, but we can do social media and blogging and content marketing. And he said, wait a minute, stop. He said, there's 8 things on the list. There's no way you're great at all those things. There's got to be some things you're better at than others. What do you do better than anyone else? He said. Now, he said that for a couple reasons. One is he wants some context for when he meets with the other 3 PR firms. He wants to see if they do different things really well. So he wants to position them in his mind. The other thing is that more and more, and research backs this up, decision makers don't want solutions and companies that are all things to all people. They want specialization. There's a great book that I highly recommend called A Job Done Right, and that really captures what buyers want. A job done right is a theory that's encapsulated in this book that talks about people, basically, companies buy products as if they were hiring someone to do a job. So you're not buying a product to do 50 jobs or service. You have one problem and you want to, quote unquote, hire the right product to do the job that solves that problem. So this idea of all things to all people is a bit of an antiquated notion, or it's becoming a little bit out of favor. Because again, I think buyers recognize it. Well, wait a minute. They say they can do all 5 things that we need. Is that a coincidence? Or did they look at our, they saw our RFP and said, we're great at these 5 things. It's not realistic. The flip side of it is, as a company, you need to know your sweet spot. And it's important to ask people, what do you think our sweet spot is? What are we great at? I went through that process 5 years ago one summer. I did sort of a planes, trains, and automobiles tour of people that I had worked with over the years, people I had worked for and with, and clients, former clients, and bosses, etc. And I asked them this question. I know I'm good at a number of things. I believe I am. Is there something that stands out? Is there something you think of me as being better at than other people? And the answers to that question, because they were fairly consistent, led me in a direction that helped me double the size of my consulting practice without doing anything differently, without spending more time on my work. Because it helped me focus in an area of my business that was much higher value, which happened to be the thing that people said I was really good at. So you need to know the sweet spot, because that's where all your confidence is, and that's where the market's confidence is in you. So anything you do to position yourself or expand your positioning or reposition should tie back to the fact that, hey, you know us for this, and that's why we're doing this. And this second thing that we're doing is because the market said they had this elevator rant, and that's why we're addressing it. So you start to see how these answers maybe fit together in a little bit of a mosaic, if you will. Here's the big one. Here's the big one. Number 5, what would make you a customer for life? So I asked before, who wouldn't want a customer for life? And I'm imagining that nobody raised their hand, which means you all want a customer for life. So I call this the killer question. So what do you think happens when I ask people this? What do you think they say? What would make you a customer for life? They say, gee, Bob, no one's ever asked me that before. And these 2 pictures are basically, these were my reactions in the very beginning when no one's asked me that. And I would say, how could that be? Every time I talk to audiences, they say they all want customers for life. They all want customers for life. So how could it be that you're not being asked that, Mr. Customer or Ms. Prospect? So the fact is, this is where this is a great way to demonstrate the gap between our perspective and our customer's perspective. We all want customers for life, but we don't go to them and say, hey, what would that mean to you? What would that look like? What does that mean? What would make you a customer for life? And if you recall, in the example I gave of the IT vendor, the expression customer for life actually came from one of the people I interviewed. She said, if you did that, we'd be a customer for life. So I can't stress enough the importance of this question. It's where so many insights have come from. Yesterday, I was giving a talk to an actual audience live in the room, and I don't usually ask this, but I said, by the way, does anyone think this question of customer for life, is that hokey? And one person raised their hand, and then when he raised his hand, a second person raised his hand. And I said, I get that. I thought it was hokey in the beginning too. But there is zero risk in asking if you mean it. So if you ask a customer or a prospect, what would make you a customer for life, you can reword it a little bit to your comfort level. You can say, look, you know, we really want to build relationships, which is, I know is a cliche. Say, what would make you a customer for life, hypothetically or figuratively speaking? It doesn't have to be literally till you die. So there is apparently, you know, there are reactions that say, well, you know, I would never ask that. Well, my answer to that is basically, you know, as I get out and talk to more and more people, and as this sort of more customer-centric approach to marketing becomes more prevalent, someone's going to be asking this question, and it may be one of your competitors. So think about asking, what would make you a customer for life? So I'm going to wind down here. I'm going to conclude with another example that is perhaps the most dramatic sort of improvement in a company that I've witnessed, that I've participated in. The T-Mobile one may be the most dramatic, but the one I've participated in, using this kind of same approach of listening to the customer and assuming we don't know what they need and figuring it out. So right out in Virginia, in our technology corridor there's a software company a couple years ago, and in 2 years of business, and they had raised money, in 2 years of business, they had sold 0 customers, and they had a couple beta customers that were using the software and they were getting feedback, but they had no revenue because they had sold no deals. So I met with the CEO, and I was just helping him really just troubleshoot. Someone introduced me, and I said, well, have you thought about this or that? And their pitch at the time was, our software platform helps you gain visibility and control over your cloud environments. You can improve governance and run your cloud more efficiently. Now, running your cloud means, you know, using a cloud-based computing service like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. It's the whole computing power as a service business model. So it's definitely popular, and it's growing incredibly fast. So this is software that if you can figure out this pitch, because there's a lot of jargon in it, what it basically says is we're going to help you manage all that stuff more effectively, resulting in 0 sales in 2 years. So I always think about the, you know, at their board meeting, imagine the plethora of hatred that the investors had for this company after putting their money in and not getting anything back for 2 years. When I went out and talked to so some of the beta customers, but also others in the target audience who would be decision makers for this kind of product. And this was a product that was probably a 6-figure license fee, and it would take time to install and integrate, and, you know, it had some complexity to it. They all indicated universally that they would never buy this product, which was, as I started hearing that, I started preparing myself to tell the CEO that. The rant was, we're not going to buy that. We're not going to buy that because cloud is still new, and it's changing, and the way we use it changes. So we don't even know what our requirements would be to go decide which software is best to manage it. It's just not realistic. It's not realistic. So they said, no, thank you. Then we talked some more, and they said, well, is there one specific problem it solves really well, like a feature, because it had so many features in it. And I responded that, well, there is this one feature that it's kind of like a programmable light switch. So whereas today your Amazon Web Services computing power is running 24/7, and you're paying for it 24/7. But the people using it go home at night and they don't use it. So this programmable light switch will allow you to, with just a few keystrokes, it'll turn your stuff off at 8 p.m. and turn it back on at 6 a.m. or whatever, whenever people come in the office. And by doing that, you can reduce your monthly cloud expenses by 20 to 60%. And you know what they said? They said, yeah, we actually kind of, now you mentioned, we remember that feature that's in the product. And I said, well, why don't you buy it then if you liked it? And they said, because we don't want the whole product. We don't want to pay 6 figures for a big complex thing. But if you could just solve that problem, like, can we just buy that feature? And I said, no. And they said, well, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're telling me you can solve a problem, but you're not willing to sell me the one feature that does it. So at that point, I had enough insight to go back to the CEO of the company and take him through the results and the feedback and kind of synthesize what people were saying. And they took a strategic decision at that point to say, we're going to have to shut down the company, but we're going to start a new company that is a very specific piece of software. It's actually a web application that is going to be this kind of parking feature. In other words, when you park your car at night, when you're sleeping, it's not running, and so you're not paying for gas. So that was the analogy. Park my cloud. I actually didn't like the name at first, but I think in retrospect, it's quite brilliant. And I want to give credit that there was the CEO did a very courageous thing by saying to the board that they should pivot and invest in this new product and in developing it and marketing it. And there was a very smart product strategy firm that actually took the insights that I came up with the CEO and the board and said, here's how we would package this. So I'm not taking credit for the concept of Park My Cloud, but the insight that led to it. So after 2 years of selling nothing, in about a year and a half since then, Park My Cloud has acquired 70 enterprise customers. And when I say what's an enterprise customer, McDonald's, Sage Software, Fox News, Newstar, there's some that aren't, well, Capital One's on here, Raytheon, Boston Consulting. So this goes to show you that when you have the right value proposition based on what the customer really thinks and needs, you don't need to do a lot of marketing in the beginning. We had a very skeletal marketing and sales operation at this company. There was a marketing manager who was kind of focused on content and sending out emails and writing blog posts. And we had no dedicated salesperson. It was basically the CEO and the chief technology officer on the phone saying, oh, how'd you hear about us? Great, yeah. And they would pitch and do a demo, and people started signing up. On the strength of the customer wins, the company was able to raise another $1.7 million in funding, and that was, I guess, 9 months ago. And now they're out looking for the next round of 5 to 10 million, and they're getting the attention of some very high-profile potential investors. So the point is, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, companies struggle with marketing and sales. And sometimes they have to revisit actually what it is that they're marketing and selling. And in order to do that, I would say that if you hear the words, oh, we're going to do a rebranding, or we're going to revisit our marketing strategy, or we're going to do some strategic planning, any of those initiatives that don't involve going out and talking to customers is a huge risk. It's a huge risk. And you can't go in thinking you know what customers want. You have to go into it in an open-minded way. So you've been very patient with the, yes.
I want to jump in here before we have the end of the hour here, because we've had a number of questions coming in, and several of them are kind of in the same genre here. Samantha and David both asked something along the lines of, if you're very small or a new startup and you don't yet have customers, but you want to build a customer-centric business from the onset, how do you do this? What is the alternative question for, and how should they take that approach?
That's a great question. So, and that's a very common question. So first of all, I'll give you the answer, but there are a couple resources. There's the Startup Owner's Manual by a guy named Steve Blank, who talks about this process of customer discovery and how to go out and source conversations with people who may be your prospective target audience. and they obviously they may not know you. So after the answer is you define who you're trying to talk to, and you basically use your network to find people that fit that profile, and you do what I described here, which is you ask for 15 or 20 minutes of their time. And the book does a good job of outlining kind of the process and the questions more from a startup perspective, but I'm going to show you a downloadable ebook in a minute that you can also use, which I'm delighted to offer you guys, free, obviously. So when you're a startup, because you don't have a product to get feedback on, you want to ask people about the part of their life or their business that relates to the problem you can solve, that you think you can solve, and you want to get validation that that is a real problem and that they're willing to spend money or invest their time or money to get to it. So I hope that answers the question. I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. It's 1 o'clock.
Yeah, so just one last question. Could you repeat the name of the interviewer for the interview with Laguerre?
Oh, I don't think I said the name. It was Fast Company magazine, and so I don't remember the name of the article, and I was going to say I could forward it to everybody, but I can't do that. So if you search for Fast Company magazine, fastcompany.com, and then use the name John Legere, Legere, T-Mobile growth, you'll find it very quickly.
Ledger, okay. I think I made that last name a little different, and we can send it out in our email. But thank you, Bob. Do you have any final kind of comments?
I don't. I wanted to just display this last page here, this one, and you can take a screenshot or take a picture or whatever you want. But this is the link to the customer rediscovery ebook. So it's got a lot of detail, more than is in the presentation. So it's got the 12 questions, how to ask them, how to set up conversations, how to look for insights, etc. So I'd be delighted if people download that, and I think it's a good resource to get you started. So that's it. Thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you, Bob, and thank you to all of our Terps who attended today's webinar. We hope you'll join us on May 9th at noon for our next one, How to Succeed in a Future Transformed by Technology. A recording of today's webinar will be posted to the Smith School alumni website. Have a great day, and go Terps.